So what we're going to talk about today is common cyber threats, just threats that are out there on the internet, online, that could impact your account, keeping accounts safe. So, first we're going to talk about the threats that are out there, and then we'll talk about what we can actually do, what you can actually do to help keep your account safe. And that's where we're going to spend the majority of the time in this presentation. And then at the end, we'll come back to a topic of, someone has compromised your account and what do you do? And so these will kind of be the steps of how do you go about taking care of an issue and responding to that. And we'll go through that at the end. So I guess to get started, online accounts, what are they? An online account is basically a service that's on the internet, whether it's a website, an app on your phone, really anything that's on the internet that requires you to sign in using a username and a password, and it's personalized for you. So some examples of this are your credit union, online banking account, social media sites, Netflix, Amazon, Google, anything that you log into on the internet is kind of in the realm of what we're talking about today. So to kind of level set, I'll go through a few definitions, and then we'll dive into the meat of it. So asset, this is what you're trying to protect. A threat, this is the thing we're trying to protect against. A vulnerability is just a weakness, whether it's in a system or really in anything. These can kind of apply to the non-technical realm as well. And then risk. Risk is kind of the sum of the asset, threat, and vulnerability, if you want to put it into a math equation. Kind of a good example of this is you have a beach house that's on the coast, which is your asset. And then the threat is in an impending a hurricane that's coming in during hurricane season. And your vulnerability is it's a beach house, and it's not going to withstand all of the impact that a hurricane will bring. And so you kind of add that up and you come up with your risk. And in this case, it's going to be somewhat of a high risk. You can also take that and put it into a technology realm and say, your asset is your information, your personal information that you have within your online banking account, and your personal, your name, your account number, your all the data that's in there. And the threat is someone trying to get access to that data. But if you're a fairly normal person, and normal in the sense that no one's out to get you or after you, and you don't have any enemies, and you use a long secure password, and you do all the right things, your risk is going to be on the lower end of that spectrum. So just kind of a level set as we get into the presentation. And I guess along those same lines, what is your risk profile? So as I talk about the different threats that are out there, and how you can go about protecting your accounts, think through what is it you want to protect? What do you really care about protecting? Because something I may want to protect may be different from something you want to protect. If you're an elected official or someone in a public, you're well known in the community, you might have a higher sense of protecting your reputation. Whereas if you're someone who has a lot of knowledge or data you're trying to protect, you may have a different, you want to protect your data versus your reputation. So kind of think about these things and how you want to apply these to you and kind of, determining what your risk profile is. All right, so now we're going to jump into some common cyber threats. And this list could go on, but I tried to just come up with the top, kind of the most common threats that are out there, especially related to online accounts and to account compromise. And what I mean by account compromise is when someone logs in or gets into an online account without permission, so an unauthorized login attempt. Um, and so kind of the most common one is going to be stolen or guessed passwords. If you have your username is your password, or something very common, your favorite sports team, those may be pretty easily guessed from a password perspective. Uh, if you had an account for a company and the company had a breach, there are quite a few of those in instances where a company's breached and the attacker who gets that data posted online for everyone to see. And so it's on the internet, and then anyone can then go and download and use that. And so what could happen is you could have had an Adobe account back in 2012, and if you never changed your password and you still use the same username and password for your Netflix account, someone could take that list and log in into your Netflix account and view whatever they want to do or change your information. Let's see, so the next threat we're going to talk about is phishing. This is where someone sends an email to you, and someone sends an email to you and they're trying to get you to either take an action or to give them some information. So the action could be something like going and clicking on a link, or installing some software which could potentially be malicious, or giving up information such as security questions or even your password. So if someone is able to convince you. The next threat we're going to talk about is malware. So this is just software that does something malicious. This can be downloaded silently in the background if there are certain websites that have a malicious advertisement on the page. Sometimes, depending on the vulnerability on a system, they can get installed silently if your systems aren't up to date and aren't patched. And then other times you can have something like a piece of Trojanized software where you say, I'm going to download this calculator application, but the calculator also has a keylogger and it sends all my passwords back to an attacker, and then they get my password that way and can get into my accounts. Social engineering, this is where someone poses as someone they're not to try to convince you, build trust with you, and get some information from you, such as your login credentials or some way of getting access into your accounts. And then the final one I'm going to mention is a lost or stolen device. So if you're in a public place or you just lose your phone or your laptop, if you don't have a password on it and someone picks that device up and then opens up an app or opens up an application that's still logged in, they can do some different things. So they could change your password, they could take action, using your account, so they could buy something from Amazon. Depending on what you have open, they could do all sorts of malicious things. So these are the kind of things I'm going to talk about next. And as far as these are the things we're putting these security measures in place to guard against. And while, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, the Adobe breach and how multiple companies have their passwords, their companies are breached, and then their customer database is then put online. This website is called Have I Been Pwned, and there's a well-respected security researcher by the name of Troy Hunt, and what he does is he's a good guy. He's not a bad guy, so this website is okay to visit. But what he does is he goes and collects all these public breaches, and he doesn't post them so you can download them, but what he does is he indexes all the usernames, and he says, okay, you can search your email address or your username on his website and determine if you've been found and if your information has been in any of these breaches. And so it's a good way you can set up alerts through the website, and he'll notify you if your email address comes in next week for some type of breach, or even you can set it up for your company to where you can have your IT administrator, someone who can prove that they, own your company's domain and receive alerts for your entire organization, which is also a great thing to have to know when your accounts are breached. So just to throw that in there. So now we're going to dive in and talk about keeping our accounts safe and how we can go about doing that. So really I'm going to touch on 3 points. I'm going to touch on passwords, how to create strong passwords, how to store them securely, and really just good password hygiene. We're going to talk about multi-factor authentication, and then we're going to talk a little bit about privacy settings within your online accounts. So before I talk about those, I feel it necessary to kind of mention device security, because we can put all these safeguards in place for our online accounts, but if the device we're on isn't secure, then some of that, especially if it has malware or something on the device that's going to steal your keystrokes, such as malware, then it's not going to really matter how many safeguards you put on your online account. So just a few things to kind of quickly touch on before we move forward. Change your default credentials for all your devices. So on your laptops, your phones, you generally will create an account. So those aren't much of a concern. But if you have a network router or a router at home to where you take it out of the box and you plug it in, it's going to have some default usernames and passwords. So you just want to make sure that you change all those passwords. The other thing would be any kind of Internet of Things devices, smart, anything that you plug in for your house, such as a thermostat or a camera. Make sure you change those passwords. Turn on your local firewall on your devices. Apply all the updates from your operating system for any software that's installed, and upgrade the firmware, especially on your network devices, such as your router or your firewall. And then use some type of antivirus software. This will protect against a lot of different types of malware. There are even some next gen AV that does anti-malware protection. So there's some good solutions out there. See what's out there, and make sure you're using these on your devices. And consider using an ad blocker. As I mentioned before, sometimes you can go to a website and get malware through an advertisement. And so sometimes these networks or these ads contain different malicious pieces or malicious software. And so what happens is, if you use an ad blocker, it's a plugin that goes in your web browser and it blocks some of these. Sometimes it makes sense to use them. There are some ethical dilemmas with it, as if someone has a small website and they're using the ad revenue from the ads to make money, am I keeping them from earning revenue based on me blocking their ads? So some people, there are debates. I'm not going to fall on one side or the other, but just to kind of mention, this is a good way to improve your overall security while you're online. All right, so now we're going to talk a little bit about passwords. And so, you've probably heard this a million times, but I'll just rehash it quickly. Really, best practices for passwords are to never reuse your password, to use long and complex passwords. I say 12 characters plus. Anything under that's going to be easily guessed or cracked if someone were to get access to some of these different breach dumps that are out there. I suggest using a passphrase versus just a password. This gives you the ability to make an easier to remember and a longer password. And really, when it comes to passwords, length is king. The longer your password is, it's extremely, I guess it adds it increases your risk of a password being guessed or cracked substantially by using a longer password. And then also change them periodically. You could have the best password, but if it shows up in one of these breaches and it's on the internet for someone to use, it's not going to be very secure. So periodically change it, and at a minimum change your passwords once a year. If you have a higher risk and you want to kind of reduce some of that risk, change your password once every 3 months or 6 months, kind of whatever makes sense for you. There's really no one size fits all, but you have to just kind of weigh your risk and see where you fall on that spectrum. And so, as I talked about password link, this is a great illustration or a comic here talking about password link. And so, if you look at this first password here, where it says Troubadour 3, looking at it visually, it looks like a very complex password. It's probably 10 characters here. But if I take that, and there's a lot of math involved here, but behind the scenes, but basically if I guessed 1,000 times for 3 days, I would be able to guess this password based on its length and complexity. So in this scenario, you've got this password. It's really easy to guess if you use certain computer applications to do that, but it's really difficult to remember. But you come down to this next box, and you've got correct horse battery staple. 4 random words, but they're pretty easy to remember. And then if you take that same analogy of 1,000 guesses per second, it would take 550 years to guess this password if you went through every possibility. So really, you've got an easy to remember password that's hard to crack, and so that's what you really want whenever it comes to passwords. And kind of along those same lines, I use this in a previous job. I had to do a lot of user interaction and helping people come up with strong passwords, and this is something I kind of put together to help illustrate, and I hope this kind of helps you. So what I suggest doing is picking 3 or 4 random words, and really it depends on what your use case is. But you take some random words. In this case, I picked chicken blender, airplane orange, and then you pick 2 numbers, so 90, and then you pick 2 symbols. But it makes it easy because you type your 4 words, you press 90, and then on your keyboard you press Shift and press those same numbers, and you get the symbols on the keyboard for those, which are open and closed parentheses. And so you put all that together, and you've got a 32 character password, which is really strong, and it's going to be really hard to crack. And that's what we're really looking for. Nobody's going to be able to guess that, and it's not that hard to remember. And so we'll go into, I just put together a few samples of long, complex passwords. Maybe this gives you some ideas on some good ways to create a password. But I guess the issue here is you're going to create these these passwords that are long and complex. But how are you going to remember them? Even if you use things from books or songs or just random words that are out, that you can remember, you can't do that for everything. At least I can't. So how are we going to remember all these passwords? So my solution for that is to use a password manager. And so this is a vault that allows you to store your passwords and store them securely in an encrypted fashion. The only thing you have to do to access them is to put in your master password. And so think of it, with a lock as a physical vault. You have a vault, and you have to open the vault with a key. And so your master password is going to be the key that gets you in the vault. And inside your vault, you've got all your different passwords for all your different sites. And so once you unlock the vault, you can see the passwords or copy the passwords, so you don't actually have to know what they are or remember them. And so this is great because you can take a really long, complex password like the one I illustrated previously with your 4 random words, and use something like that for your master password. And then from within the application, It will allow you to generate random passwords, or you can come up with your own and store them in there. So you don't really have to, this allows you to be able to use a unique password for every website, but still keep them long and complex and be able to remember them because they're stored in your password manager. And for these, there are kind of two flavors of password managers. You have online and you have offline. And so the online means that you use a company's software and your password database lives on their servers. So it lives in the cloud, if you will. And so you can, with these applications, you can go to their website and log in and see your passwords and access them. You can also get a mobile app or a browser plugin that allows you to kind of pre-fill your passwords in an easier manner. The other option is if you have your tinfoil hat on and you say, I don't want to give my passwords out to some company because they'll just log in as me, then you can do that as well. And so there's an offline option where you have a piece of software that lives on your computer, you install it, and it creates an encrypted database that also stays on your computer, so no data leaves your machine or wherever you want to store it. And so this allows you to have a somewhat of an offline option to where there's no internet connectivity required. You can also kind of somewhat make it multi-device in that you can load the application and the USB and the encrypted database and the application on a USB drive, and then you can just leave all that data there and plug it on whatever computer you're at, so you can make it portable. It still doesn't solve your mobile issue if you're a heavy mobile device user, but it gives you options depending on what your use case is. These are a few popular password managers. I will caveat this and say this is not an endorsement for any of these products. I've used some of these in the past, and I think they're great products, but this isn't it's not an endorsement. These are just popular ones that are out there. You want to decide what's a good fit for you, what you feel comfortable with. If you don't like any of these, you can always go to your favorite search engine and search for password manager and see what comes up and see what the best solution for you is. But they are a great way of keeping your passwords nice and secure. And the next few slides here are going to be showing what a password manager looks like. And so in this screenshot, this is logging in and creating a new entry for within your password manager. So you basically use your master key to get in. You can make different folders, and then it's just filling out a form, your name, your URL, your username and password, and the application will even generate a password for you if you want it to. And so in this screenshot, this is one of the online password manager examples, and so this is the browser plugin creating a password for you. So as you can see, the little slider bar, you can drag the link, and it has some options as far as what characters are on the screen or are used in the password. In this example, it shows you how it just pastes a password in. So the browser plugin knows what website you're on. It pre-fills your username and password if you want it to, or you could copy it and paste it in if you don't have the browser plugin or don't choose to use that. So with that said, so that's really, that's all I have on passwords. And so we're going to move on to multi-factor authentication. And so you've probably heard this, and some of you, may have used this in the past. This is great, and now it's becoming, more popular, and it's on a lot of personal accounts as well as enterprise-grade applications as well. And so what it is it's two factors of authentication. Your factors are something you know, something you have, or something you are. And so when it comes to a username and password, that's something you know, and so that's your first factor, is you have your username and password. And so in order for it to be two passwords, it has to be something from each of these categories. And so it can, if you know your username and password, you can either have something or you can have something you are. So something you are would be a retina scan, facial recognition, a fingerprint. Something you have, which is probably the most common use for multi-factor, would be a one-time passcode, an authenticator app that's on your phone that has a code that rotates for a one-time code, or it can receive push notifications. And I'll show you some of what that looks like in a moment. But the biggest thing with this on this page is, why should I use a password? Why should I use a multi-factor authentication? Really, it gives you protection for your account if your password's stolen. So if I had an account that used multi-factor, I could give you my username and password and say, go ahead and log in. But if you don't have access to my secondary factor, being my cell phone or a token, whatever the factor is, you can't get into that account because you're going to put in your username and password, and then it's going to prompt you for that second factor. And so if you don't have that, you can't get in. So it's a great way to protect against accounts, even if someone is able to guess or know your password. Yeah, so as I mentioned, your one-time passcodes, generally it's a 4 to 8 digit code. Generally it's a 6-digit code. But it can come in over text message, voice call, a hardware token, or an authenticator app. And in some cases, it has a hardware key that you plug into the USB port on your computer, and it contains a certificate or some value on it that the application is able to use. And these screenshots are just a few of the what it looks like. This first one here is what it looks like when you do a push notification. You just get a prompt on your phone to hit approve after you put in your credentials. In this case, you get a rotating code from your mobile device or from a token here. And these are kind of the same thing, just one is software and one is hardware. And then in this case, this is one that plugs into your USB drive, and it has a certificate or has a value that the application will use. There's also, I will give you this one caveat of something I've seen recently, is there's a new way that these attackers are trying to bypass multi-factor authentication. And so what they're doing is they're trying to get people to give them their one-time passcode. And so the ploy that they use in this example, if you can see it, is the attacker says, hey, I used to have your phone number and I can't get into my account because it has multi-factor authentication on it. Can I log in and generate a code and you send it back to me so I can log in and change my phone number? And because of human nature, we're nice, helpful people, and if your phone number is fairly new to you, it's perfectly plausible that someone's gonna have that, maybe have this issue. So you're gonna help them, and when you do that, they're sitting at their keyboard and they're gonna punch in the code and get into your account. So I don't know how much that will take off or come around in the future, but it is something to kind of think about and be aware of. So the last thing I want to talk about when it comes to account security, securing your accounts, is your privacy settings. There's been a lot of news about this lately, and a lot of companies are giving you more options, especially your social types of sites, as far as what data you can share and where it lives and that kind of thing. But really just go through on your different accounts that you have where you are putting a lot of data, and generally there's a section where you can go and look at your privacy settings. Go through and see what's shared where and who can see what, because it would there are just a lot of things here, and I'll just grab a couple of these out, these scenarios I came up with. But you're on vacation and you post your pictures of the beach, and you think all of your friends can see it, but your privacy settings were that anyone in the world could see it. And so the burglar says, hey, I know where they live. I see the geolocation on their previous picture, so now I can go to their house and rob them. That's kind of an extreme case. Or you rant online about your job and your boss sees it, and you might have a negative impact on your employment or something like that. But really just think about your sharing settings and what's out there and what you're sharing. Google has an account timeline, and this gives you the ability to go in and look at the different places you've been. Google tracks your location in certain instances in your search history, and a lot of this information they disclose that they're going to capture it, but they give you a nice portal so you can see what information they're capturing, and they give you the ability to go in and toggle what they are capturing going forward. So if you have a Google account, that's definitely worth a look to check out your account timeline. And the last thing I'm going to talk about is app permissions. Really, some apps that are on your phone or on your tablet have a lot more permission than they need, and that's kind of just the simple truth of it. And so, go through your app settings on whether you have an Android or an Apple device, and see what permissions different apps have. If you have a calculator app and it has the microphone on, there might be a legitimate feature built into that calculator that is an accessibility feature that you can talk and speak calculations into it. But if you're not going to use that, go in and turn that off, because your concern could be, I don't want anyone listening to what I'm doing while I'm using my calculator app. So, or if they're just capture all your data, there's so many implications there. But just go through and review your privacy settings and what makes sense for apps, and just kind of use common sense when it comes to what permissions you're giving applications. And so with that, we're going to jump in and talk briefly about account compromise. And so in this scenario, you have an online account and someone has been able to get into it. Someone has unauthorized access to your account. So what do you do? So the first thing you want to do is you want to stop the bleeding. You want to, if you can get into the account, go in and change your password from a machine that is clean, that doesn't have malware. So if you suspect you had a malware infection and that's the reason your account was compromised, contact your IT department or your IT support and have them help you with that issue. But find a device that's clean and change your password on it so you kind of stop the access for the attacker. If you can't get in, if they did change your password, you may need to contact the company. And so once you've done that, then you can kind of start figuring out what happened. So at that point, you can go in and log into the account and look around and see what happened. See if any of your data changed, if any actions were taken, such as your profile was changed, your email address, your phone number in your profile, or if anything happened, like emails were sent, money was transferred, recurring transfers were set up, anything was purchased. Really, depending on what the account is, kind of go through and see what could have happened. And I guess after you've done that and you found out what happened, if it was a crime, contact law enforcement and they can help you with that. Sometimes cyber crimes are a little difficult to fight, but definitely report it. And if your local law enforcement can't help, sometimes the FBI has they have a lot of resources when it comes to cyber crimes. So, and then after you've done all this and you're kind of back to a stable point, go through and use some of the things we just talked about to strengthen the security of your account. So, use a strong password, use a password manager to store it in, turn on multi-factor authentication if the application or the site offers it, and then review your privacy settings. And so to just kind of recap what we talked about, we went through some common cyber threats that are out there against your online accounts, and then we talked about how to secure your accounts online. So I gave you advice on how to store your passwords and keep your passwords strong and build strong passwords. I also gave you information on how to set up and use multi-factor authentication and the benefits. And then we talked about, kind of probed you to take action and say, hey, let's go look at the privacy settings and see where, if there's anything that's incorrectly set up. And then we briefly talked a little bit about how to handle it if an account is compromised.